In this video, we're going to talk about using vector graphics, backgrounds, and adapting code. So first of all, what are vector graphics? You're familiar with conventional graphics like an image file. We worked on some image files earlier in an earlier module. And you know what those are like, taking pictures, turning them into digital files, creating files in something like Paint or GIMP, all those things. And we generate a flat file like a JPEG or a PNG that when added into a website, if we make it larger or smaller, we're going to distort that image because it's a discrete set of different colored pixels. So we're all familiar with that. Vector graphics is a way of generating an image using mathematical equations. So rather than being a discrete static collection of colored pixels, a vector graphics image can actually scale to any size because it's being generated by equations. And so those equations can be adapted infinitely along an X or a Y axis, or scaled up to 200, 300, 400% of the original size without losing any sharpness, without losing any quality. They can be shrunk down. And the other thing is that vector graphics, because it's generating that image using a set of mathematical equations, is that it can be a lot smaller than your JPEG or your PNG image file that has a certain heft to it because of the visual information that it contains. So the vector graphics instead only has to remember those equations and can generate the actual look of the image in real time instead of having to carry all that information around with it. So vector graphics aren't good for everything. You wouldn't want necessarily a vector graphic, Sistine Chapel picture, because it would take so many equations to generate that. It probably would actually be bigger file size than an actual digital image of the Sistine Chapel. Vector graphics is really good for repeated backgrounds, patterns, things of that nature. So we can generate vector graphics backgrounds using CSS, and that's what I want to show you. And then I'll show you some places where you can find some good examples of backgrounds that you can adapt for your own purposes. Okay, so one thing you can do is use radial and linear gradients. These are commands that are included in CSS that allow you to do some interesting things with different colors and shapes. So I have a couple that I coded in. I had to look up different colors that I wanted, so it took me a little bit of time. But let's go ahead and look at a radial gradient applied to our article background. And notice I have these commented out, so they're not functioning right now. So I'm going to just comment out the second one, and we're just going to focus on this one right now. Okay, so that's going to be the one that's going to appear. Okay, so you see what's happening. It's doing a circle, and then it's got a few different colors that are radiating out, and it's so that the size is centered in whatever size box that you have it in. Okay, obviously these colors are ridiculous with this scheme, but I just want to show you how this functions. So now let's comment that one out and take a look at the linear gradient. And notice on this one, as you would expect, it's going to be based on a line rather than a circle. And notice we've got a value here. So let's say we could start with something a little more straightforward, like 180 degrees, which should just be a straight line. And you can see that the gradient goes from the red color to the blue color. And you see all those intermediate states that would get you from there to there, right? And if we reverse these two, it'll do it the other way. Then obviously, like I said, we can use different values. And notice, so 45-degree angle is going to be a sort of a slanted line, and then this negative 45-degree angle is just going to slant in the opposite direction. And I'll show you that. So we just changed the gradient there. That's one way, right? And obviously you would pick your colors a little bit more carefully than I'm picking them here, so that you still maintain your good contrast. So this is something that you can very easily code and play with on your own. But I also want to show you there are some other types of these CSS backgrounds that actually look like image patterns that are pretty cool. And you can borrow that code and then even adapt it for your own purposes. So the CSS patterns gallery is one example of a place where you can get some CSS vector graphics backgrounds. I've got a couple of sites actually linked on our webpage and below this video. And I just want to show you how these work and then how you can adapt them. You can see there's a whole bunch here. I like this particular site because it's clean, it's easy to grab the code, and you get a good sample of each one of these, and they all demonstrate a different principle. let's just start with the first one here, and you see what it does. You can grab the code very easily here. And let's go ahead and apply this to the background of our page, because I don't know if you noticed, but when this image is loading, this is a giant image, and it actually takes a little bit of time to load. That's not what we want. We don't want our users to be waiting around to load the page, especially if they're just waiting for a decorative image like a background. So again, I'm going to comment out those bits, so that is not the operative code. I'm going to paste in this code that I just borrowed. Here we have our background image. In addition to borrowing and applying these background codes, we also want to be a little bit savvy in terms of how to adapt them. This particular one is using the radial gradient that we talked about. It's using the circle, and in order to get the sharp lines, that's where this 0% is coming into play. And then we see there is some hexadecimal coding for color. And then we also have these RGB codes in here. Notice when you use the RGB value, the last value, right, RGBA, the last value stands for alpha. RGB is just red, green, blue, and it's mixing together just like we do with hex codes, but it's mixing together, and the last one is the alpha channel A, or the opacity. So when we see this and the last value is set to 0, we know that that's actually an invisible thing. It's being used to shape this code, but it's not actually affecting the color. So we don't want to mess with that. We want to leave that one alone. What we want to focus on are these colors if we want to change the color. So there are two colors here that tracks with what we see on the page. One of them is a green, one of them is a brown. So we can easily figure out what color each of those are by putting that into our hex. And notice they're only using 3. What that means is it's just a doubled value. So that's the one. That's probably the brownish color actually. And then the 8A3 is probably going to be our green, and it sure is. If we want to change the green, and that's definitely the one we want to change, how about a neutral brown? So we would just need to find the color that we want, and then replace this color. And there we go. And again, if we want to change that border color, we can definitely change out this to use a different color. So there you have it. We can change that out to be colors that we want. So that's the idea. And again, there's lots of these patterns that we can use, and you don't want to just use them as is usually, right? Because you want to be able to pick your own colors and that sort of thing. So you really want to look at them and, you know, sort of read them in a savvy way and figure out what's going on as best you can, and then, you know, look for the color codes, and that's what you would want to change. And it's, again, really easy to grab these, put them in your color picker, test them out, and then choose a new color. My one tip that I would have for you is just to replace. So notice, like in this one, the 999 appears in a bunch of places. Make sure that you replace every instance of that with the same color. You can test out, you know, replacing that with different colors and see what happens. It's going to change the pattern of the background, but that is my one tip. Now, obviously, if you want, you can also start changing other values just to see what it does, like how many degrees or the background size, and it's definitely going to transform the pattern and do different things. So you can certainly play with those and see what happens. And I would encourage you to do that, because the more you play with it, the more you're going to figure out how it actually works. Even things like this, right? We know how to change that. Transparency, we can change that. You'll learn new things just by studying these patterns and starting to adapt them and change them. That's how you do it. And like I said, they're easy to find. There's lots of different sources for them. You just grab some code, put it into your own, and then you can start adapting it to really make it suitable for your own site.